We're not going to coordinate it with Syria. We will certainly want to deconflict to make certain that they're not about to do something that they might regret even more seriously.
Is the president prepared if Syrian defense forces respond to U.S. warplanes going and launching airstrikes in Syria? Is the president prepared to take out Assad's defense forces?
Well, I think it is evident to anybody who's paying attention here that that is indicates the president's willingness to order the kind of military action that's required to protect the lives of American citizens, even if it means sending our military into Syria.
Well, they're talking about Syria and what the U.S. will or won't do in coordination with, or at least deconflicting, as the Secretary of State said, with Syria for airstrikes against ISIS. Also, in the meantime, there appears to have been some outreach to Iran at which, at least publicly, the tweet coming back from the grand leader there in Iran, Khamenei, said, "I rejected U.S. offer to Iran about ISIS because U.S. has corrupted its hands in this issue." Mr. Zarif rejected U.S. Secretary of State's offer, too. That's the foreign minister of Iran. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, what about this back and forth on the coalition?
Well, this will be called the coalition of the unwilling. Kerry has not had a very good record with international conferences. He called two to depose Assad, and they broke up in disarray. He had innumerable meetings in Europe with the Russian foreign minister over Ukraine, which ended up losing Crimea and about half of the east. He's now in negotiations with Iran over nuclear weapons for over a year, and the only result thus far is a radical weakening of the sanctions. He calls a conference in Paris, and you know, the rule in diplomacy is when you call a conference and you are the world's leading power, you wire in advance at least a few points. He came out with nothing. Nothing. The French and the British have offered to do reconnaissance. In other words, the French will take pictures, and we're going to be involved in fighting. That's all really nice. And the Saudis apparently will write some checks for the Syrian opposition, what's left of it. There's no commitment of troops on the ground. And Turkey, the key ally in the region, with air bases in NATO, which would be perfectly suited for airstrikes on Syria, has said absolutely no. And now this humiliation with Iran slapping down another outstretched hand from the Obama administration with contempt, and yet the Secretary of State still reiterating, well, we're going to keep open the back channels with Iran. At what point does this administration understand a no, and something about the dignity of the U.S. and not to go, you know, scrapping around offering an open hand to Iran, which wants to humiliate the U.S. and wants to see us lose?
Mark.
I actually disagree. First of all, in Iran, there's no way that Iran could ever appear publicly to be uniting with the U.S. However, their interests are very much with us, you know, hitting ISIS could indirectly benefit their ally Assad in Syria. That's another layer to this. I think the White House is not disappointed with the help they're getting. I mean, we don't expect other people to do the airstrikes. We do expect them to provide intelligence and funding. I think the bigger question about this strategy is about the boots on the ground part. We're going to have some, more than the U.S. the administration has been talking about. We're going to have some spotters, CIA trainers, etc. But I predict that the eventual number will probably be pretty close to the number we would have left behind in Iraq if only we'd gotten the Iraqi government to sign that agreement. We still might.
So this is semantics. Take a listen to the White House Chief of Staff over the weekend about that specific question, boots on the ground.
The President's been clear that the ground forces on the ground in Syria will be Syrian.
So can you say today that there will never be an American troop on the ground in Syria?
I can say today, John, exactly what we're doing, what the President's strategy is, and what I've just outlined, which is that we, using our unique capability, air power, ISR, and training and enhancing and equipping of those forces on the ground, this fight is every bit as much theirs as it is ours.
So, Steve, it wasn't an answer to that question, and let's be honest. They have to have some American personnel on the ground to coordinate strikes. I mean, it can't happen with the Free Syrian Army alone.
Right. I mean, and they've conceded as much. I mean, 475 people over there in country
In
are
Iraq.
going to be doing the work that we need them to be doing. They count as troops on the ground. I mean, it's to me, it's sort of a semantic game that they're playing that's symbolic of the broader chaos in the strategy. There is no strategy. The president's going out of his way to avoid looking like a war president. He doesn't want this to be a war. They didn't want to call it a war. Then they said it was a war. Now they're saying, we're not going to put any troops on the ground when in fact we are going to have troops on the ground. It's a chaotic strategy, and I think the fact that that Ed Henry's report notes that the White House went out of its way to point out Vladimir Putin's help on Syria, and that after the tweet that you read from the Iranian leader basically put it back in our face that Iran wasn't accepting our help, the State Department put out a statement saying, look, we're not going to be technically coordinating with Iran militarily, but we want to leave the door open for some potential help. I mean,
along those lines, here's what Marie Harf said at the State Department about this questioning.
We're not going to outline every discussion we have, but to be very clear, we are not coordinating with, we do not want to coordinate with, are not planning to coordinate with Iran in any way on Iraq, period. The Iraqi government can make its own decisions, obviously, about who it works with.
So, Charles, I mean, we're kind of getting around all these semantic games, but the bottom line is it's a war. We're going to have some boots on the ground, and they're probably going to work with Iran, whether they say it or not.
There'll be some, look, you don't want to have Syria shooting at our planes, so we'll probably give them a signal the Americans are coming and, don't shoot, otherwise we'll knock out
You're talking about the Syrians now.
Who are an extension of Iran. Iran controls Syria, let's understand. Syria, as a result of our inaction in this, is now a client state of Iran. Iran controls the whole area. Syria and Hezbollah in Lebanon has a tremendous influence in Iraq. The whole point of the coalition was to organize Sunni Arabs who had seen us as an adversary because we toppled Saddam. Sunni Arabs to join in the fight against ISIS with this Sunni Arab, so that we are not seen as joining in a civil war in Islam where we join the Shiites, meaning Iran and Assad and Hezbollah, against ISIS, which is Sunni. The idea is to have Sunnis on our side. The Saudis have said if there is any coordination with Iran, we're out of here. The Saudis have said if Iran showed up in Paris, the Saudis were going to stay home. So Iran didn't show up, but we're talking to them behind the scenes. Look, the reason it's a coalition of the unwilling is because Obama is unwilling. Everyone knows it. He telegraphed it in his speech. Everybody understands he's ambivalent. They've all looked at what he did in Afghanistan and in Libya. And they say if the leader of this coalition is ambivalent and reluctant, why should we join?
Is the sense now, Mara, that this is going to take a long time before we actually see this move, these airstrikes?
Airstrikes in Syria?
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's a good question. I mean, they even long before the president's speech, they were doing reconnaissance flights to look for targets. But the Free Syrian Army has to be trained and equipped to the point where they can actually take advantage of the damage we do, help
Hold
us spot
territory.
hold territory, spot targets, whatever. So I think that is going to be a while.
You agree?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a while, in part because the Free Syrian Army, which was a good force and a moderate vetted force 2 years ago, is now compromised. I mean, they're sharing weapons with al-Nusra Front. It's a problem, and it's a problem of our own making.